It doesn't just start at the trafficking experience, it starts more with the vulnerabilities that I had as a kid, and that was what got me into my trafficking situation. It doesn't just happen. I was just on this broken path, and I carried a lot of shame. But I knew I never wanted to become a prostitute. Like, that wasn't anything I ever dreamt of.
Jasmine Grace Marino has been working to fight human trafficking, but her role as an activist is only part of the picture. Jasmine was a trafficking victim, working as a prostitute for more than 5 years. When she was just 19, she met a guy just a couple years older than her.
And he bought me a drink, and we exchanged phone numbers, and I was, impressed because someone paid attention to me, and he seemed to have a lot of money, and he was dressed nicely. I was intrigued because I had never dated a guy like that, and I didn't notice the red flags. There's plenty of red flags, but I wasn't aware.
Not long after, the guy she thought was her boyfriend took her to meet up with one of her female friends, who, it turned out, was also a victim.
He took me to her house, and she was living in a nice, affluent, expensive area of Boston. And I walk into the home, and it's big and beautiful, and she has, expensive cars in the driveway. She wasn't in any danger, it didn't appear. She wasn't handcuffed to anything. She wasn't drugged. If anything, she looked good. So I was convinced that, okay, maybe it's not that bad.
That was the beginning, a story similar to so many others. Stories of human trafficking, stories of victims of a crime that happens in plain sight. Trafficking has taken many forms in Vermont and has been present for quite some time. Ken Picard, a journalist at 7 Days, Vermont's local weekly newspaper, has been covering human trafficking stories for years. He became aware of this in 2003 when he investigated Mexican immigrants working on dairy farms.
At the time, I wasn't really thinking about that as a human trafficking story. As I went down there and started talking to some of these guys, it became very obvious very quickly that none of them were in the country illegally, and that they were living under conditions that, looking back now, I realize, they were being taken advantage of in many different ways.
The workers had tight living spaces, little free time, and were in constant fear of being harassed by authorities. Throughout his reporting, Picard discovered situations similar to the one in 2003, this time in local massage parlors and restaurants.
Often these are people who owe debts to somebody, so they were brought into the country, perhaps illegally, and so they get on a van in Chinatown in New York City, take a van someplace in the country, come up to Vermont. They may not even know they're here in Vermont.
In 2013, Picard went to Essex Junction to inspect a house where people were being kept. What he saw was shocking.
It's this big old Victorian house that's been sort of subdivided into little rooms. And every room has a padlock on it, and at night the workers would come back and they would padlock them in. It was very small, and it had hand-built bunk beds with four or six beds in there. The windows were all covered with newspapers. The ceiling was leaking. I was told that there were 26 people who lived in this house.
Jasmine didn't live in such conditions. Her so-called boyfriend was requiring her to take regular trips to a brick building in Hartford, Connecticut.
No one probably knew what was going on, but it's hidden in plain sight. There was probably 10 to 15 women there, young girls and older women, very different in age. And then the sex buyers would come in and pay a door fee, and they would come into the lounge and they'd scan the room, and then they would pick the girl that they want. You do whatever you do for the hour or the half hour. I was just so disgusted, but at the same time, once it was finished, I looked down and I had maybe $80 or $100, and I just tried to focus on that.
But soon, Jasmine would understand the money wasn't hers.
And we go to get out of the car, I had this pocket full of money, and he puts his hand out. And I knew that gesture meant to hand over the money, but I just start logically thinking in my mind, well, why would I give you the money? I just did all that, you weren't even there. Wait, are you my pimp or are you my boyfriend? And I hand over the money, and I felt like I lost my voice, I lost my courage.
Helping victims find courage is essential to becoming a survivor. Edith Klomoski directs the Give Way to Freedom Foundation, where survivors of trafficking can get help.
So basic needs like housing, getting a job or an education, and just predictability in their life.
Because of her work, Edith knows the signs and patterns that lead to someone getting exploited.
Indicators of human trafficking are many, and they're also applicable to other things that might be going on in a person's life. But really poverty is really the baseline piece of Basically human dignity that is missing. What that creates are push and pull factors that can be quite nuanced. But most people are, trying to provide for themselves and or their families, and they want to be able to do that. What happens is, while they're trying to do that, they're vulnerable to people exploiting them. And so the exploiters will either notice that someone has a history of domestic violence, is trying to flee, and then try to pull them in to a situation where they can exploit and traffic them.
Eventually, Jasmine's captor made her go to Craigslist to find more customers.
I meet a sex buyer online, and he didn't want anything sexual. Changed his mind, what happened? But he paid me a lot of money, and then week after week he would call me, and I'd go to his house and we'd hang out and watch TV, like SpongeBob. But I started to feel safe with this guy because he wasn't touching me or hurting me. And this guy that I had been seeing owned his own small business, and so I reached out to him and I asked him if he'd lie and say I worked for him so I could get my own place. And he did.
Jasmine was introduced to independence, but still went back and forth with the pimp, who at one point beat her up badly. She ultimately went to the police. It was the start of her escape that began with one man she trusted. People who reach out to victims are key, but sometimes technology can play a similar role. Professor Dwayne Dunstan is developing an app called You Have a Voice. It's a questionnaire to be administered in hospitals designed to help victims.
It's designed to bridge the communication barrier between trafficking survivors or victims and a service provider. The communication barrier is the most problematic, and again, even if they speak the same language.
Getting victims to talk can be difficult because they're often coached not to. Dwayne believes his app might be a way around that.
People are more likely to respond to sensitive questions via a computer assessment, and that's pretty universal as well. Having to look someone in the eye and then tell them what happened to them can be traumatizing. And if the person asking questions asks questions that are not sensitive, they can re-traumatize the person. We have about over 30 languages, including American Sign Language, which is just for video. And we are also working on audio as well.
Have you ever felt you could not leave the place where you worked or did other activities?
What we're hoping is that this application can be that electronic version can be that bridge to allow them to have a voice without having to say anything.
Apps like this show more people are paying attention and working to end the trafficking crisis. As a survivor, Jasmine is working toward the same goal.
It's been about 5 years. I've been doing work in the anti-trafficking movement. I've written a book, The Diary of Jasmine Grace. It's all my old journal entries from when I was trafficked with present-day reflections. It's amazing. We give out so many books to women that we meet that, they read it and they can't believe that's my life too, and again, like the light bulbs go on and the healing begins because they realize they're not alone. And then I developed bags of hope as a way to reach out to women that are in vulnerable situations. We make these bags filled with basic items, socks, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste. We give out over 1,000 bags a year, and we give them out to vulnerable women, detoxes, domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, women on the street, anywhere we can find vulnerable women. So it's just been amazing how we've seen women grow. My organization has grown to 4 of us, which is pretty cool. Another woman who's a recovery coach, and then 2 other survivors. So it's amazing. We've met these women, and now we've mentored them, and now they're speaking and telling their story and mentoring women. So it's nothing better than seeing other women rise up and be empowered and encouraged, and I'm able to pass the baton, so that's great.
The efforts of people like Jasmine and others are more than courageous. They're trying to make a difference for people who were enslaved, here in Vermont and everywhere. The problem is pervasive. Human trafficking thrives in the shadows of our society, in plain sight.